Hello everyone, this is my part 2 video of my Cajun Gunworks spring kit for my CZ75 SP-01 with the manual safety. I have everything fully installed. I even got the trigger pin, so you can see it right here. That part was one of the easiest parts to do of the entire assembly. The rest of it, kind of difficult, and this video is going to give you some tips and tricks to make it easier for you to do the same thing. It's difficult to do, but it's not impossible. What makes it difficult is that you do have to disassemble a majority of the firearm, and there is a lot of pins that are small, and there are a lot of springs that are small. I do recommend that you have specific tools. I had to get by with some of the tools, and it made it extra more difficult. You should have some specific gunsmithing or gunworking tools like tweezers that are curved or needle nose pliers that are curved, different types of needle nose pliers, long ones without a lot of aggressive ridges or maybe have the rubber coating on them, having a set of punches of different sizes, having a roll of duct tape or something to elevate it. You can use one of those armor blocks things. I just use a roll of duct tape. I've never really seen any use for those things. So definitely have to have that. You're going to need to have an armorer's hammer, and you're going to need to have quite a bit of patience. So I didn't think it was going to be too difficult, which it wasn't, but because I had never done it before, and this is completely different than say like your run-of-the-mill Glock, it's a lot more complicated, the parts. If you look at the tech mat here, there's 63 parts. On the Glock tech mat here, there's 35. So the parts list here on the Glock tech mat only goes to 35. Here it goes to 63. So there's quite a bit more parts to a CZ pistol than your run-of-the-mill striker fire pistol. I had no problems taking apart and putting together Glock or SIG pistols. This was a little more challenging. So let's start off with, you're going to have to be able to take a majority of it apart. What you don't have to take apart is the magazine release. Everything else pretty much has to come apart. So knowing that, you should know that this should be a little bit of trial and error, unless that you're, used to working with things like this. It's going to be kind of difficult at first, but you get through it. So I'm going to take the slide apart, and I'm going to talk about the different parts and the different installation and some tips and tricks and some things that you should do and some things you should not do. So the kit really loosened up the tension on the slide. Now I can do press checks no problem, which I wasn't able to do before. And you can definitely feel a difference in the trigger. So there's always the take up, right? All of them have this. But once you get to the wall, the break is so much more smooth. Reset. You hear the audible click now? It didn't have that before, and I don't have to pull back as far. So I'm curious if I get that short reset system, how much improvement it will make. I really like the improvement I'm already feeling right now. It's real easy to control. And the reset is great, and it's audible. And you can definitely feel those lighter springs in the plunger, the firing pin, and then the hammer spring, and definitely in the recoil spring. So for the price, I think it's a decent kit, but I think it's lacking this part here and the firing pin. I don't really see a point in not buying those two parts too. So you can get the kit, but then also I recommend getting the firing pin, because you're going to change the spring on the firing pin anyway. So you're going to have it apart, and you might as well get this part too, because you're going to have that apart to change the trigger spring, because you need to change that spring because that's part of the kit. So all in all, I'd say it was difficult but not impossible. You might have some trial and error, but make sure that you follow my tips and tricks, and I think you can handle it. Here's tip number 1. Start with the slide. The slide is the most easiest to take apart and put back together. You have to have a good set of roll pins, you need to have your armorer's hammer, and you need to have your duct tape. But this is pretty simple. So there's a pin here, and it goes down through the bottom. And then what that will do is release the extractor and the spring behind it. Then what you're going to want to do is you knock this pin out right here, And then this will make it able to take the plunger and the firing pin out. And in the kit, you're going to replace the plunger spring and the firing pin spring. So you're going to need to disassemble the top of the slide. So this is good to start with. I think that you should be able to disassemble this and then reassemble it with the kit parts before you even start on the lower. So I recommend starting with the slide and completing it before moving on to the lower. You don't want extra parts laying around, and the parts are specific to this. Now, there is also this pin that comes in the kit. I did not change it. I didn't even realize it was part of the kit. When I look at this pin and I look at the Cajun Gunworks one, they look the same. The other parts, you can definitely tell a difference. Now, I'll show you the difference between the recoil springs, but that's the only part that I can show you because the other ones are, obviously in here. But take my word for it. If you see the plunger spring compared to the one that's the original one, a lot smaller. Same with the firing pin spring. It is like a third of the size. It's ludicrous how small it is. So now I see why there's such a difference in the action of the pistol, because the springs are half the material. You can see quickly, we'll do the spring comparison here. So this is the original spring. This is like 20-pound spring. This one is one I bought. This does not come with the kit, but I highly recommend this, is getting the 14-pound spring. So they say the CZ Shadow 2 comes with a 14-pound, and I think this is still heavier than you need. I think you can go lighter. But now look at the difference. You see how much thicker this one is? It made it so hard to pull the slide back. When I just put this in, I was able to do press checks and rack the slide with like my front grip like this and pinch it, which I wasn't able to do because of the tension is so great. So if you wanted just a simple upgrade, you can just go with these. You can get actually a kit, they call it the tuner's pack, where it's between 10 and 14-pound recoil springs. They also have different pounds of hammer springs, but you have to change other parts too, because when you lighten the hammer spring, you got to change some of the other springs too, like the plunger spring, firing pin spring, yada, yada, yada. So I also found out that doing this kit, that I think that this kit that I bought is kind of not necessary part of a kit that I would recommend buying, because there's no point in buying this kit and not buying the enhanced firing pin. It doesn't come with that. So I think that next time I'll just get the short reset system. I think that one does come with the firing pin, because now that I know how easy it is to take the slide apart, I'm definitely going to order the Cajun Gunworks firing pin and put it in there, because it's no big deal. All I got to do is deal with the slide. I don't have to deal with the lower anymore. So that's tip number one. Focus on this slide first, get this accomplished, then let's worry about the lower, because the frame has some parts in it that are going to drive you mad. If you don't have the proper tools, or if you have big hands, I can see how this would be extremely difficult, because if you look inside here, this little spring in here, I don't think you realize how difficult it is to get inside the assembly. So there's two pins here. There's the pin that holds this longer pin, the trigger, to the bar mechanism here, and then there's another pin that you put in there temporarily before you put in the spring retaining, the firing pin, the trigger return spring pin, right? This one right here. So you put that other one in there, and it's only in there temporarily, and it's so tiny that you can barely get it in there. So you take the spring, and it's kind of like at a 45-degree angle, and it's the really hard to get that little spring in there. So I actually have it right here to show you how tiny this is and how difficult it was. This part maybe took me, I would say, like an hour to get right, because you want to have the long leg pointing forward. That's the part that sticks through right here. That's how it goes, like this. But there's the other part of it that goes down below. There's a little space here in the trigger that you have to force it down in there and hold it down in there with one hand while you take this tiny little pin and try and put it through there. It doesn't sound that difficult, but when you try and do it, you should see how small the pin is, right? And then how small that spring is. And it's in there like at a 45. And then once you get it in there, the pin is so small that it doesn't go all the way through. It barely holds it in there. It's only meant to be in there temporarily before you push this one in there and then push this one all the way through, and then this one comes out. So it's real easy to lose some of these parts, and it's real easy to get them mixed up. I remember the Cajun Gunworks video, he kept going over that. It's like the longer pin here, the shorter pin here, then always get this. So it doesn't come with the kit either. So I think this kit is missing two parts. It's missing this pin, and it's missing the firing pin. So I think that that should be something that you should buy when you get the basic spring kit. Get this part and get the firing pin. There'd be no point. You got to take it apart anyway to do the rest of the kit. So why don't you just get those parts? If I would have known that, I'd have just bought those as well. But I didn't know that. But now you do. So there is some tiny parts on the inside here that you can't see that are an extreme pain in the butt to deal with. So there is this little plastic piece right here, and there is a detente right here. So on this side of the firearm for the safety, there is a detente like in an AR-15, right? And on this side, there is just this little plastic piece. Now, after I had disassembled it, I didn't know that that plastic piece was in there still. I was cleaning everything with a Q-tip, and then that plastic piece fell out. And I'm lucky I didn't lose it because I didn't know it was in there. So it's real easy to not see parts or miss them. And because the tech mat is black, it was easy to miss. But thankfully, it fell out right onto me, and I was able to take it and look at my little guide here. This thing was a lifesaver, by the way. And then figure out, oh, it's this little part that goes in here. And it works with the safety mechanism. So it's kind of like a detente, but there's no spring. But there is a little detente with a little spring here. And it doesn't go straight back. It kind of curves a little bit. So it looks kind of funky. This spring here also is a pain. This is why you need the specific tools. You need like a doctor's pick, because there is a little notch here in the safety. You have to lift this up to get this to come out. Getting it back together was kind of complicated too, because there's a certain order of operations that you should go in, and if you don't, you can make it more difficult on yourself, which I did. So I disassembled everything because I wanted to see how it, disassembled so I can reassemble it, at any time. You don't need to take this screw out here and the spring. So these springs here, 34 and 33, the magazine catch spring and the trigger bar spring, you don't need to take this out for any reason. You can just leave it in there. I took it out there, and then when I was reassembling everything, I was forgetting that I didn't install this, and this spring here pushes up against on this trigger bar. So I took the sear cage out and the hammer assembly, I would say probably 10 or 15 times before I figured it out that I needed to put this back in here in order to get the spring tension on here, because when I pulled the trigger, it was just dead and flat. Then when I turned the firearm upside down, it would kind of work, and then when I lifted up on the trigger bar, it would work. I was like, oh, wait, what did I do? Oh, and then I figured it out. I took this out for no reason, just because I wanted to see how it worked. And if you're a lefty, you can take this out and change it to the other side without messing with anything else. I've seen other people's video that say that you have to take this pin out. That is a complete and utter farce. I never took the pin out, and I put it back in there after I already had everything already back in there. So that was another problem, is seeing disinformation, and then, what other people say isn't necessarily true. I'm thankful that there was the resource for me to watch, but some things the people said weren't true. So that was another problem. So I should have just watched the Cajun Gunworks video. I don't know why I just didn't go to the source immediately. So that was another problem, is since I watched a few disassembly videos, and then I figured I could just reassemble it after I disassembled it, but there's a certain order that you have to go in. And so definitely you want to make sure that this is in first. Have your trigger bar spring and the screw and everything done. And when you want to take this out, here's a pro tip. Make sure that you know that there's Loctite on this and that don't strip that screw. So you want to make sure that you jam the screwdriver down in there real hard and get good tension so it breaks the Loctite loose. That was not too difficult to do, but I did mar the screw a little bit, but that's no big deal because you can just get a replacement screw. So that's not really a big deal. It would be a big deal if you stripped it or something like that. But thankfully, I recognized that it had Loctite on it and then just added a bunch of pressure. So you got to make sure that you have all the right pins and springs and everything, and don't lose them, and make sure that you keep them in an orderly fashion. So I had everything all splayed out, which probably didn't help either. So I put this together and had it together and apart so many times now that I'm highly confident in doing a different kit now. But if I didn't have that trial and error, I think I wouldn't have learned as much. So having those errors really helped. And I think that having this mat with the diagram really helped also, because it gives you a visual of how it should look or how it should, go together. They also have the BD and the 75B here because there is some specific parts that are different. This one has the little lanyard thing, but all the rest of the trigger bar assembly and the little spring so the magazine doesn't catch against the hammer spring, all that's the same. But, the little lanyard thing on here is different. And there's a few other minor differences. But other than that, these tech mats, this was highly useful to have. The only problem is it's black, and the other parts are black too, so it's easy to not see some of the parts. So, I'm surprised I didn't lose any of the pins or the springs. And especially this detente spring here, you got to be really careful with that, because I had that one go flying, and I almost lost that little plastic piece. So this plastic piece here, though, I don't think is that big of a deal if you don't have it, because I installed everything and didn't know that I didn't have that. It was still on the mat. I couldn't see it because it was black, and it worked. Everything worked fine, but I think over time that, missing space, not pressing against the sear cage would have been a problem. So you definitely want to make sure that you put everything back as intended. So I do think that this is a very doable project, but some tips: make sure you have the right tools. Make sure that you watch videos on how to do the specific firearm and not one that's related to it. Like, don't look at the decocker one for the safety one. Watch the specific video for this. The Cajun Gunworks videos were good, but they go really fast and they've done it 10 million times. So you're going to run into problems they don't have, right? So it's a good resource to have, but doing it yourself will build confidence. So now I'm confident to get the short reset system for the 75 compact. So next up will be the trip to the range to see how everything works out and notice the difference in performance.